From KUNC and the NPR network, this is In the NoCo. I'm Brad Turner, in today for Aaron O'Toole. In 2004, Tom Mowle was a political science professor at the Air Force Academy in Colorado Springs. It was early in the Iraq War. The U.S. had invaded just the year before. A top general asked for help understanding the landscape in Iraq, and Tom volunteered. A few weeks later, he left his desk job and flew to Baghdad. Tom had no idea what he was getting into. He lost colleagues throughout the war and lived in a base that was frequently under fire. He revisited those experiences in his new book. It's called Chaos in the Green Zone: My Time as an Iraq War Strategist. Tom spoke with me about his account of what went wrong in the Iraq War and what he hopes military leaders might apply in this moment as the conflict with Iran continues. There has been a lot of ink spilled on the Iraq War over the years. What do you hope your book adds to the conversation?
So I had a couple things. One is a voice that's rarely heard. Most books about the Iraq War, wars in general, are either from the point of view of someone who's on the ground, they're a sniper, leader of a platoon, medic, a whole lot of different voices there, or it's the voice of the commanders who are in charge of everything. There's few books that get to the voice of the people who shape the commander's understanding, which leads them to make the decisions that they then send people off into combat situations. And the decisions that were made in the fall of 2004, all of that kind of made the final results inevitable. And that's based on decisions that were made in the time I was there.
Back in 2004, you volunteered to go to Iraq to advise senior officers on things like preparing for Iraqi elections or strategizing about moving troops around. What made you say yes to that assignment?
Well, I've been in the military at that point for 16, 17 years. I was a political science professor, and there's something about if there's a war going on and you're in the military and you can help, there's sort of a sense of duty and obligation that if the country thinks I can help make this war go better, then it's kind of my obligation to volunteer to do this.
This was a dangerous assignment. What do you remember about the first time you felt concerned about your physical safety at the headquarters building where you were stationed?
I was concerned about my physical safety long before I got to the headquarters building. I expected that we had secured the airport and the area around it to not have to worry about ground fire. I was wrong about that. As soon as we landed, the enemy blew up a fuel tank of some kind, big explosion, big cloud of smoke billowing into the sky. And our ride into the Republican Palace was delayed because the convoy picking us up, one of the vehicles had been hit by an RPG on the way in. So I very quickly realized that I had volunteered for a place that was far more dangerous than I had thought a military headquarters would be.
Wow. All in your very first minutes on the ground.
Yes, the first day, Friday the 13th.
Tom, you described decision-making there as chaotic. At one point, you were asked to recommend a city to bomb in order to improve security before the Iraqi elections. How do you approach making a recommendation like that?
With a lot of awareness that a lot rides on the kind of advice I'm giving. The sort of moral seriousness of the tasks I was given is much higher than anything I'd ever experienced in my life. And I, as an Air Force officer, have little knowledge of the details of a ground operation. So I approached it more from how much would we improve security in the country versus how difficult would it likely be. And my recommendation, which turned out to be the same as a couple of other people in the office, was that the worst target for that operation would be the city of Fallujah, because it was relatively small, but would also be relatively difficult. We would not gain enough by going into Fallujah, and we would probably lose a lot of people doing it. That was, however, the decision that was made was to launch the second battle of Fallujah soon after that.
They were looking for confirmation for their ideas, is what you're saying?
Yes.
Was there a pattern of your higher-ups sort of disregarding the advice they asked you for?
What I found is there was a lot of cases where leadership was not thinking through the consequences of what they might want to do. Fallujah was an example of that. Many, many examples of the coalition and military doing something out thinking about, well, what happens next? How is our adversary going to respond?
What was your sense of how badly or how well things were going at the time, and who could you tell about it?
There was a sense of optimism. Maybe it's inherent in Americans, maybe it's inherent in people doing difficult jobs, that we're going to figure this out, we're going to make this work. And bad news about how the Iraqi people were understanding the occupation, how they were relating to the election, their support for democracy, it just was not welcome. There's just this bias towards optimism. And those of us who pointed out how things might not be going well, we were colorfully disparaged and sent away.
So you finish your time in Iraq. Years later, you sit down to write a book about your experience, and you're pretty open in saying the U.S. made mistakes in how it approached the war. How do you think about the decisions that you helped advise on when you look back now?
I did not perceive just how bad things possibly could get. We did not really understand our enemy. We did not understand what their goals were. So we always thought the war was going to be about the Americans, rather than what it became a year later, different groups of Iraqis, a civil war that we were now intervening in. So the war transformed by 2006 into this sectarian civil war rather than this insurgency as such. And I didn't anticipate that. So that was one of my failings, is I did not understand well enough how things might go. It always seemed like we were realizing things just a little bit too late to be able to act on those things.
The U.S. is in a conflict with Iran at the moment. As you reflect on what you saw in Iraq, to what extent do you see some of these patterns repeating themselves in our engagement with Iran?
To a dreadful, dreadful extent. All the things I have mentioned, starting perhaps with not thinking through the consequences of our action, the whole idea that Iran might not respond by blocking the Strait of Hormuz was, I don't understand how the U.S. government could not have anticipated that. But there was, again, this toxic optimism that things will just work out. We will launch these attacks, Iraq will collapse, surrender, and we don't need to worry about consequences because everything is going to work out. In Iran, it's not clear why it couldn't have waited. If you wanted to go to war with Iran, maybe get minesweepers in place in anticipation of something happening, maybe work to get allies on board. So yes, there's a dreadful amount of commonality between what I saw in Iraq, what I participated in Iraq, and what I see from a distance happening in Iran.
Tom Mowle is author of Chaos in the Green Zone, My Time as an Iraq War Strategist. We'll put a link to an excerpt from his book in our show notes and at kunc.org. If you have feedback on this interview or any interview you hear on In the NoCo, drop us a line. Email noco@kunc.org. That's NOCO@kunc.org. That's it today for In the NoCo. I'm Brad Turner. Thanks for listening.